Hey, welcome to Shop Talk with Brandy and James.
We talk about all things related to mental health and cross-cultural workers.
Thanks for joining us, and welcome to season 3.
Here we go. Welcome back to Shop Talk. We're excited today to have Bethann Miller, and we're going to be looking at mindfulness.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bethann.
My pleasure.
Well, Bethann Miller is the co-founder and CEO of Safe Place, a ministry that provides support, training, care, and guidance to folks serving in Christ-centered ministry throughout the world. She's also a licensed chaplain, board-certified pastoral counselor, and author of The Invitation, a handbook that sets the stage for couples to engage in deeper relational connection. After serving over 30 years in full-time ministry and traveling to over 53 countries, it is Bethann's joy to support pastors, missionaries, and leaders in that to which they have set their hands. Beyond this, Bethann can be found either out riding her motorcycle, Pearl, or at home with her husband, Tom, and their 2 cats watching the National Football League channel. Okay, tell me about your motorcycle, Pearl. I have so many questions.
Yes, thank you for asking that. Out of all of that, to pull the motorcycle.
Nice.
My motorcycle is one of my deep joys, and it is where I practice a lot of mindfulness and contemplation. So we can talk about that, but she's an old school 2006 Suzuki Boulevard, totally stripped down, black and white. She's gorgeous. I love her. She makes a lot of noise.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes,
your countenance and talking about her is great.
Yeah, I can't. When I lived overseas with mercy ships, a small group of us had motorcycles so we could get in and out of the African villages quick. And we would just load them by crane up and down on the ship, whatever nation we would go to. So motorcycle riding is in my blood. I had a little one when I was a kid, a toy, and yeah, I just love it. It was also a requirement for marriage to Tom that he had a motorcycle or at least drove one. So yeah.
Okay, so one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you today, besides motorcycles, is about your work with contemplation and mindfulness. It's something that is dear to me. I just think it's a really important part of mental health and wellness. And so I want to know from you just a little bit about your background and how you got started in working with this with the people that you also work with.
And what is it?
I'm going to give you my definition of the two things, okay? So, or how I would define them. So, mindfulness, I would say, is being aware of yourself, your surroundings, and others, and being able to be fully present in that. That's how I would describe mindfulness. Contemplation, I think, is really focusing ourselves on a thought. It's usually something of beauty. We work with so many people from trauma backgrounds or that have served in trauma backgrounds. And to me, the only righteous, meaning helpful way to perceive trauma is through the lens of beauty. Because then we see it for what it is, right? From Psalm 73, all this was oppressive to me till I entered the house of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord. So, because otherwise I think we get swallowed by the trauma. And contemplation can help focus us on the beauty, and it can open up those fields inside of us to bring wisdom and beauty and life that then can strengthen us to walk through trauma with ourselves and with others as well in a productive way, in a way we don't get stuck and we don't get overcome by the evil of it.
I think it's helpful just to remember that trauma is the imprint of trauma is what happens. It's the imprint on people's senses and their systems of something that happened in the past. And one of the reasons mindfulness is so powerful is because it is all about being in the present.
Right. And I think too, I mean, you guys know this better than I do, as I'm not a licensed counselor, but this invokes the whole limbic system, right? Which are fight, flight, and freeze mode. And you know, that gets triggered during these things. And then those memories, our senses, right, trigger those memories again, even after it's over. And mindfulness helps us connect to now and be able to process life and respond to life now.
I think that's so important as I'm talking with people and helping them to realize what their bodies are doing, like being aware of their whole the space they're taking up in the here and now, and being aware of it. I think that's something that a lot of people have to be trained in to learn how to pay attention to, but how incredibly beneficial that is, because it is all connected, and it's really beautiful how we're all connected that way. But helping people
Yeah.
get in touch with that
Yeah.
is good work.
We talk a lot about the window of tolerance and being aware that there's a tendency to be in hyper or hypoarousal. And, the polyvagal theory is all about our mind-body connection and how do we kind of actually be able to monitor and then control what our experience is, which is where mindfulness comes in.
Yeah, and James, the polyvagal theory is all about the limbic system's response, right? And how we're wired and how God designed us. And then what is the result of that? What's the effect of that on ourselves and then on others? Because this stuff goes sideways. So I think mindfulness and then moving into contemplation. I don't think you can be contemplative unless you do have a sense of mindfulness. Because contemplative presence requires us to quiet ourselves, which has to first come from mindfulness. So I think there's a path here of mindfulness can lead to that contemplative experience that then makes way for us to be able to integrate beauty into our life and truth and wisdom and goodness and a whole array of things.
Well, we're starting to talk about like the benefits of this and the mind body connection and the effects on the limbic system. I wonder if you could go a little bit more into that and why mindfulness might be helpful and beneficial for people to practice.
Because we're body, soul, and spirit, right, Randy? And so we have to respond to what we go through in that way. If you take someone that, I'll use an example, caring for someone that missionary or global worker serving in Africa that had seen quite a few deaths and ended up in quite a few morgues. And that's a very difficult scenario in the developing world, right? Because of resources, refrigeration, electricity, all that stuff, right? I don't have to go into detail of that. But as a human being made in the image of God, these things violate our senses, right? We're not made for this. We're not designed to stand in front of some of profound human suffering in our own or others, right? That's not the original design. So it violates almost, or it really affects that God image in us. So our limbic system does get triggered, right? Because we automatically, without even realizing it, defend ourselves. What I've noticed in myself and others that gets stuck on, and yep, there's a diagnostic, label for that, but when that gets hijacked, when our whole limbic system gets hijacked, then that gets stuck. We're going to begin to live out of a place of hyperarousal or escapism, right? Constantly. So we're not going to show up. Veterans go through this all the time, right? Men and women that served, particularly in war zones and come home. The statistics are frightening of the divorces and family breakups because of this, because they can't. How do you integrate what they saw and experienced on the field into, hey, what's for dinner and how's work going, right? That those two things are not compatible with each other. So, and I noticed this in myself, Brandy, when I returned home from living in Africa for many years. One of the first places this showed up was I was sitting at a stoplight. And when we served in Liberia and Sierra Leone, we carried kidnapping bags with us in case we were taken. And that was normal for us, right? It's what you do, right? Now, thinking about it now, I'm like, oh my goodness, every day we're thinking if I get taken, and what that does to you, or what it can do to you, the effect it can have. Different people respond in different ways depending on their past trauma and medical. There's a whole cacophony of reasons why people respond differently in this, but the stage is certainly set to be deeply affected and impacted as a person. I'd stop at a stop sign and I would notice that I was hyper vigilant constantly, way too long at a stop sign, because what I was trying to do was make sure no one was coming at me, everything was safe, there was no tank coming this way or a car that's going to ram into me and then cause me to get out and violence done. All these things that I was trained, that kept me relatively safe on the global field, they don't work well in Long Island, New York, right? They're not needed. And then some of my friends and family members close to me would say, hey, you seem on edge all the time. We can't even say anything to you without you really responding in a critical way and defensive way. And that was true. I think street slang would be, I was jacked up.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a real New York term there, but Yeah, that can happen. So helping people begin to, not all at once, because that can do damage as well, right? But kindly stepping down with that, treating themselves with kindness. I love in the scriptures the words God's loving kindness, and the big definition of that word, or a more full definition, is his intent for wholeness. So to apply loving kindness to ourselves and to others is to lead us into a place of wholeness, because some of these situations that we're in actually fracture that from us.
For sure, your example is a great example of adults, but this is also really relevant for kids in our lifetime. We call it developmental trauma or adverse childhood experiences.
ACEs, right? Yeah.
ACEs, yeah. Nadine Burke says, the system, our bodies, goes from being life-saving and adaptive to maladaptive and health damaging, but children are especially sensitive to this, particularly to repeated stress activation because their bodies are developing. So higher doses of adversity, which would be multiple of these adverse childhood experiences, impact all parts of our body. So your example is also true of kids, which as we move towards adulthood, we have this part of our system that's designed to be self-protective, that's just on all the time, whether it's a big T trauma experience on the field as an adult or difficult experiences throughout one's lifetime.
There's also like the little T trauma and the things that we experience daily and the things that move us closer to our margin of what we're able to handle well. And I think cross-cultural workers or people in ministry tend to have those things often, experience those things often, that we don't always recognize the effect that they have on our minds and body and spirit. And I just think that mindfulness and practices of mindfulness can really be helpful.
Yeah, I remember when I first stepped into, let's say, Africa for the first time, and any developing nation or anything, it doesn't even have to be developing, any nation outside your passport country, right? That has become normal to you. Particularly in the developing world, though, your senses are assailed, right? Like your senses are bombarded with smells you've never smelled before, sights, hearing, taste. All our senses are engaged. The way something feels, I think for the first 6 months in a nation, you're like a kid wide-eyed in a candy store, just like trying to assimilate everything that you're experiencing. So as I work with people that are going, to the field, that's one of the things that I'll say to them is be prepared at first. Your senses are going to be on high alert, and new things every day, new memories, new smells, everything is new, such a discovery time. And at the same time, you're trying to make sense of it. So you do get quite exhausted. And I know whenever I would go and live in the bush or off the beaten path and leave the hospital ship and out into the villages, I would literally feel myself click into what I called survival mode. And what that meant is I just felt myself kind of gear up to, okay, you're going to have to figure this thing out. And that could mean figuring out, okay, here's the latrine. Where's the stick I'm going to hang the toilet paper on? Okay, check, got that one, right? Like, and where am I sleeping? Is it safe? Is my dwelling safe to sleep in? What creatures are around, right? To be aware of all that stuff. So practicing mindfulness is, I think, it helps so much to integrate our senses back and give value to them as they're God given to us. So give value back to them. And how often do we really live fully, or as much as we can, in any given environment? This is something I'm trying to practice by not taking so many pictures on my phone when I'm somewhere. That's a practice of mindfulness, to say, okay, pull back and stay in the moment here, right? Nothing is going to be as good as your memory,
Yes.
right?
I think about that too. If I go for a walk in a nice area, or I got this habit of always listening to podcasts, always having my earbuds in. It's like, actually, this is going to be a really good practice to just turn that off and be aware of where I am and what's around me.
So this is so interesting, Brandy, because there's a much younger generation than us, right? I'm probably a little
Really?
older
Wait,
than you
wait a
guys.
minute.
Yeah, it's shocking, right? And I
That's
just
hard.
heard this news program. My husband and I were talking about this. I said, "Hey," I call him Handsome. His name is Tom, but I said, "Hey, Handsome, did you hear there's a new therapy tool coming out?" And he's like, "No." And I said, "It's called free walking." And he was like, "Tell me about it." And I said, "Well, you go out and you walk." And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, you don't have you're not listening to music, you don't have a phone, you're just going out and walking. And we started because I'm not kidding. Like, this is being branded now as a new therapy. And you could pay someone $10, a month, and they'll help you go out on a free walk. So
It's just called
yes.
walking. Yeah.
I know it is.
Yeah, so
It
here
is.
we go, right? So again, I think we're coming back to our senses. Can I
Yep.
say that? Like, I think this is coming back to our senses to slow ourselves down, but to live, right? It was
Yes. Yeah.
Ignatius that said, the glory of God is a man
Mm.
or a woman. I'm adding that fully alive, right? So I think a lot of times in our world and our work, we're not fully alive.
Yep.
So for me, mindfulness is practicing be alive where you're at right now. What does that utensil feel like in your hand? What
Mm.
does the chair feel like that you're sitting in? What does the clothes you're wearing feel like? What are the sounds of Thanksgiving, a meal we just celebrated in the United States? What are the sounds of Thanksgiving? Starting to pay attention to these things. What are the sounds in Southeast Asia, right? Down in the countries that you guys are in. What is the happening around you? And then I think we're better able to identify our actual needs. So many times when I work with people, one of the questions I ask is, what do you think you need? I have no idea. Usually people say, I have no idea. That practice of mindfulness will lead them to quietness that then they can hear and identify their own needs.
I love the idea of mindfulness as a regular practice in life and not necessarily a reaction when things get really tense, but having that as a practice
Right,
that's going to help build
right,
margin and build awareness.
right.
It's also a muscle memory thing. So the more that we practice mindfulness when we're already regulated, the better access we'll have to those skills when we're in a place where we're in hyper arousal or hypoarousal, or we need to actually be doing something intentionally to reestablish ourselves in the present.
Right. Because when the amygdala
Yeah.
takes over, it's like
Well, when the
step in.
amygdala takes over, it's then you have to 5 4 3 2 1, right? Then you're actively trying to bring yourself down from somewhere. I myself experience a high level, although I do it all the time, of anxiety when I fly, which is very unfortunate. It's a
Wrong
bit
profession.
ironic. Yeah, wrong
Yeah.
profession is right. But I can have a very high anxious response quite easily. And if I don't learn to quiet myself down, I'm seconds away from my amygdala getting totally hijacked. So learning, okay, how do we care for ourselves and develop, as you said, James, the muscle memory, that this becomes a part of it actually just becomes a part of who we are. A way that
Yes.
I started practicing this was because I spend all my time speaking to people. When I'm in the car, just complete silence, no music.
Mm.
I actually don't listen to podcasts, so this is a treat for me. So I don't follow anybody. I don't have enough capacity, I think, or the limited capacity I have. I need my brain to rest. So I've learned to just shut the radio off in the car and just sit in silence. Of course, on my motorcycle, that helps. I don't have my phone on my motorcycle. I don't have a radio on my motorcycle. I don't have headsets intentionally, because the desire is to feel the bike, to feel the road, to feel the environment around me. And not so consequently, that's one of the best places I can connect with the Lord too, right? Is when I'm on the bike, because I'm able to quiet myself.
And I find whenever I'm able to quiet myself, I feel like I'm so much more tuned in to God's presence. And I'm not grasping and trying to make something happen. Like I'm
Yeah.
going to have this amazing quiet time. And that's not saying that quiet times are bad, but just if I'm able to be still and be
Yeah.
grounded, I'm much more aware of him being near. We were talking about mindfulness. I wonder if you could lead us through a couple of just basic practices that maybe if our listeners haven't experienced mindfulness before or looked into it, this could kind of help them dip their toes into it.
I'm just going to really go completely old school, completely technology free. Okay. And just
Okay.
say, go outside, whether it's day or night, but go outside, choose one thing to look at, just choose one thing to look at, and begin identifying everything you're noticing about that thing. Let's say it's a tree. Watch the wind blow through it. Think about the tree. How long has that tree lived? How is that tree getting nourishment? What are the leaves on the tree doing? They're moving. How is that happening? The wind is going through it. How does that tree sustain storms? I think nature is an incredible way to practice mindfulness because all of creation testifies, right, of the goodness of God. So in that way, we're putting ourselves right smack in his presence, perhaps in a very different way for folks where it's not structured as far as do this, do this, do this, do this, and practice listening to your own breath, right? To understand the breath in, think about it, dwell on it, and the breath out, to pay attention to that breath and listen to your own breath. It's something we don't think about at all. And that can begin then inviting us to quiet ourselves down.
I like that.
Also, go barefoot.
Yeah.
James, yeah, there you go. James, I love the sound when I walk on gravel. It's been always gravel or wood, like wood in a barn. That sound that it makes, and to pay attention to things like this. Like we can practice mindfulness in our everyday life. It doesn't have to be just sitting in a corner somewhere. These mindfulness moments, if I can make up a term, these mindfulness moments can be completely integrated in the rest of our life. It can be, this is going to sound silly, but it can be brushing our teeth and the thought of what does this feel like, and I'm cleaning my teeth, I'm taking care of myself. This is a part of being alive.
I think with the mindfulness practices, it's the expectation to not necessarily have expectations on yourself, but just an expectation to observe and to be curious. I noticed I one time we traveled in France, I picked up this lavender oil. And so I just like dab a little bit on my hands at night and smell it. And I recognized I was trying to like have this experience smelling lavender oil, which sounds so ridiculous. So I was like, what is this scent doing to me? And it's like, why don't I just, how about I just smell it and enjoy the smell of it? And that was so calming to me. But I know whenever an area that I struggle in mindfulness is trying to like kind of force this experience into it. Whereas just kind of being in the moment, I think is one of the goals of it.
It's so interesting that you said that. So I'll be a little vulnerable here. So I'm not a fan of lavender because I was in a very stressful time. So I did what you just said, Brandy, and I really like forced lavender on myself.
You went for it.
I went extreme, James, right? As is my personality, but I went extreme in that. And that was a really painful time for me in my life. And every time I smell lavender now, it's not a kind scent anymore. We're not meant to violate ourselves with mindfulness, right? That word that you used of curious, like I love the term to be respectfully curious about ourselves and about others. So mindfulness is meant to attach us back to ourselves, not attack us, or I have to do this right, or this is the experience I should get. That's the antithesis of mindfulness, right? You have to do something, but rather I think it's the awareness of just being present.
And it takes work because our minds go all kinds of places. I had a friend once that said, I think about everything all of the time. And for me, I love it because mindfulness is bridging cognitive behavior therapy, which is one of the tools in my toolbox, with taking every thought captive and making it obedient to Christ, which is 2 Corinthians 10:5. So it's this place of really being aware of what's going on in our head and then bringing our mind and our whole selves into the present, which is something we don't always do. Our minds are all kinds of places, and all of those places aren't necessarily bad or unhelpful. And sometimes it's a great thing to do to activate imagination, but to be able to pause regularly throughout the day and be present is also a powerful gift to ourselves and to others.
Yeah, it is. I think it takes a really intimate, and I'm going to define intimacy as into me you see, right? And that's from the marriage handbook, Brandy. That's where that came from. When you're intimate with someone, I don't mean in a sexual way, but when you're intimate with someone like a close friend or even your spouse, and you can sit in the same room but do not have to be in conversation, there's something very holy, Holy, about that, and Wholy, right?
It could be holy.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that takes security, right? That takes a knowledge of someone that you can be present with them and comfortable enough that you don't have to speak. So I do think many of us are not comfortable enough with ourselves to practice mindfulness, whether that's from the shoulds. I should be, you
Mm.
should be, right? One thing I say to people all the time is stop shooting on yourself,
Don't shit
right?
on
I like
yourself.
that one.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So mindfulness invites us. You don't have to do anything here, right? We're inviting you to be alive in your own presence.
And I've said this probably many times on the podcast, but cross-cultural work, ministry work attracts a type of person who's a doer and a goer and a doer. And especially when
Yep,
you have this
yep,
lens that you're doing this for God, it is
yep,
very hard to be.
yep,
And it's a struggle for us to find value
yep.
in the being, but it really is a beautiful place.
Yeah, and if I could talk about mindfulness and journeying into contemplation, I think this
Mm.
on the mission field in ministry, I think Christ modeled this for us. He modeled how to do this well. It in the Gospels, many times it says he withdrew to lonely or desolate places, right? This was a constant rhythm of his. It wasn't, uh-oh, something just happened, I gotta go. But we see this rhythm consistently through the Gospels. And it's interesting because we typically withdraw for escape. He withdrew for connection with himself and with his Father. What would happen if you and I started practicing that in a ministry type setting? So to withdraw, the vacations are great, get away, please go enjoy yourself, but that they're probably not going to fill your soul. Important, please do it, but they're not going to fill our soul, right? We need something much more substantial to get us through the day to day of the demands of ministry and needs. You know, if we constantly live only to meet need, mindfulness is not going to exist. And we're going to become very angry, bitter Christians that are cause we're fighting issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Let's just sit with that one, put that on a t-shirt. I
Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely agree. So
Yeah.
Bethann, what are some common misconceptions about contemplation
Mm.
and mindfulness? Because I do know within certain communities within under the
Yeah.
Christian umbrella, there can be pushback against it.
One, I think there's a fear of being quiet, that in order to be with the Lord or praise him, if I could use that, it has to be very loud and boisterous. But the scripture says, stand silent before your maker, right? In Job, right? Let your words be few and stand
Be
silent
still
before
and know
him.
that I'm God.
Exactly. And that's so interesting, James, because that you're quoting Psalm 46, and Israel was in a state of war. And this was the admonition from the Lord or the psalmist of be still and know that I am God, right? In the midst of the chaos, not when the chaos is done. So I think it can be counterintuitive of, man, can we actually quiet ourselves when chaos is going on around us? Yes. But that takes that muscle memory, right? That takes that
Mm-hmm.
withdrawing for connection, not withdrawing for escape. Contemplation, I think, has largely been connected with a lack, if I could say this, it seemingly has been connected with a lack of the spirit's presence in it, kind of like dead. But it's so
Yeah.
intriguing because the exact opposite, right? I love to help people practice. I just led a big conference for leaders of homeless ministries, which are 24/7, 365, brutal, totally need based, acuity of human needs, screaming. And we practice Lectio Divina,
Mm-hmm.
which is divine reading, right? And just a few scriptures. We're not looking to dissect, you know, or do an overview of the Old Testament or New Testament. And those are all great. Those all have their place and fantastic. But to pull back and to say, listen, our attachment to Christ and to our Father can be quiet, it can be private, it can be reserved for an audience of one, if you will. It doesn't have to have all these bells and whistles on it. And I think people are coming to realize that. I think this contemplative spiritual direction esque, I think some of them beautiful ways of the fine arts can, I think of the Rembrandt. That's what he did, right? He communicated the gospel in masterpieces of art. So I think some of this is coming back to us that we've lost through the hurriedness. And the more fast and furious we get, the less nutrients we get, and the more disposable even our Christianity gets. And contemplation can bring us back to he withdrew to lonely and desolate places to connect with the Father.
I think more challenging because those places are fewer and harder to come by in our normal routines.
They are.
They're not going to just happen, right? There's a reason why Christ did it at night, right? Like, yeah.
No, it'll only be spiritual. You have to do it first thing in the morning.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. I think releasing ourselves from that, Brandy, right?
Yeah.
To say, and that I used to do that all the time, and I'm grateful for that time in my life when I did that. I don't live as captured to that anymore, which I'm grateful for. I'm 56 now, turning 57. So I think the older you get to, the more you can step into some deeper wisdom that brings some freedom with it, if I can say that.
Glory be. Yes, I hear you.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So everything doesn't have to be so pointed and scaled up all the time and look great or even spoken to other people.
Yes.
You know, that there can be the beauty of this is private.
Yes. And I think in that private and that quiet contemplation and mindfulness, what grows out of that is a lot of beauty, a lot of recognition of God's nearness. And there's just such a more natural overflow of who he is in our relationship with others than I tend to see in other acts of, like you said, the more active, loud ways of connection.
So I love Brother Lawrence, right? Contemplation doing dishes. Like if the presence of Christ can't be there, well, maybe it's not over there in the steepled church, right? So I think the invitation for us is really deep to enter these quieter places with Christ. Many of us are afraid of it, I think. When I ask people what would stop them, the number one answer is because I disappoint him. That's the number one answer in Christian workers or in everyday folks working in the marketplace. I'm a disappointment to him, and that's what I'm going to hear. Number one answer, without fail.
Which
so
is not
to
true.
come back, it's not true. That's right, James. It's not true. But already there's a barrier established, right? That I'm a failure to the Lord. So why would I put myself alone, right, in his presence to hear how he thinks about me, his child? I often say to people, I think when this is my thoughts, this isn't scriptural basis. I often think when Jesus was baptized, and I'm paraphrasing, he came up out of the water and the dove came down and a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." I actually think that was for Christ. I think that was for Jesus. He needed to hear his father's pleasure over him for what the next 3.5 years were going to be and what the finale of that was, right? So first, I think to help people attach to beauty first, which is a reflection of the Lord, and then safety, being safe, even with the Lord or with yourself or with others. Safety has to be first perceived before it can be experienced. I can tell someone they're safe with me, and unless they're perceiving that safety from me, that's it. All bets off. Same thing with the Lord, I think, in our relationship with Christ, is if someone has that opinion, and many global workers and missionaries do, right? In fact, some of their service and service without boundaries can be to win that affection and to win that attention, right? It's in a very pseudo-spiritual way, but make no mistake what's underneath that brown wrapper or newsletter or, fill in the blank.
Yes.
Yep. Myself, mea culpa right here. So in my younger days, so first to come back to that truth that I am his child and to be quiet enough to hear him speak that, Romans says it's his kindness that leads us to repentance, not his wrath, right? But that's the most predominant fear that I see in people in learning to quiet themselves. I'm too scared to be alone with him.
And it's interesting because that fear is driving behavior anyway. So
Exactly.
it's
All the
active.
defensiveness, frenetic energy.
Getting us
It's
out of our window of
fear-based.
tolerance.
Exactly, Jake, because that's what we're used to, window of tolerance or zone of function, right? Like
Right.
this is what we're used to.
Augustine said, how can we know God if we don't know ourselves? So there's like a part of this that is really powerful. I think some people shy away from some mindfulness and contemplative exercises because they think it might be connected more to Middle Eastern meditation. But really what we're talking about is powerful mind, body, and soul, and an opportunity to know ourselves and engage God in really deeper and more significant ways, which also helps us be able to be present with others, which is a huge gift that we can give to people when we're not afraid of the silence.
And you guys both know as caregivers, in a caregiving platform, how powerful silence is. It's really powerful, when experienced in a healthy way.
Well, Bethann, what would be some resources you'd recommend? So some of our listeners who are looking into mindfulness and
Listen,
contemplation.
Brandy, again,
Yes.
I don't have a lot of resources. I'm going to be brutally honest on this.
All right.
Go outside, go for a walk, go for a free walk. Do free walking in the snow, in the cold, at night. Go out, look at the stars, contemplate the stars. Take one psalm, the songs of ascent, from 120 to 135, I think it is. Take those psalms and just contemplate one or two sentences in it. Go to a museum, look at art,
and use all of your senses as much as you can.
Well, engage it. Next time you eat, think about what it is that you're eating. Like, what does that food taste like in your mouth? I think we have what we need already, Brandy, right? So I think any wisdom is borrowed wisdom, right? We're borrowing it from the Lord. So however newly it's packaged, it's still borrowed wisdom. So I think to step outside or in the shower or in your bed or in your kitchen and shut the music off, shut the radio off, shut the podcast off. Begin to set these moments where you do have silence. Begin getting yourself used to this. Read the scriptures. I often encourage people, hey, begin reading the Gospels again, but don't read them from a way that you're trying to fix yourself or line yourself up to how you should be. Read them to see who Christ was. That will happen naturally.
Yeah. Let's invite people to practice. So wherever you are listening to this, we're going to do 30 seconds of silence. So if you're skipping ahead and find the silence, you're going to be really bothered and uncomfortable. But those who listen in the entirety, we're going to invite you into 30 seconds of being mindful right where you are, and use your senses. If you're driving, be safe. Notice what's going on around you. So ready, go. All right, that was 30 seconds. Try a minute next time, then 2 minutes, then 5 minutes. Some other resources, you've already mentioned one, Bethann, but Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence is a great one. Holy Noticing, and then just kind of an attitude about life would be The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. So those are some good books I'd recommend.
Agreed. I think Eugene Peterson might have, well, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, right? Speaks of that. So, yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Bethann. I feel like I could talk to you for another couple of hours about this. It's been really good.
You're welcome to offline when we're not doing a podcast recording, Brandy. I'd love to talk to you and have coffee. It is something I really enjoy deeply. So
I would too. I want to be your best friend now, and I want to meet Pearl. So.
You want to meet Pearl? Is that what you said?
I do.
You're on, my friend. Okay.
And do we pronounce
Well-
it Bethann or Bethann or?
Bethann. That's a fancy
Please,
way of saying it. No,
let's-
it's Bethann. Yeah.
Bethann.
So wait, you guys aren't married?
No.
No,
Oh, okay.
At least our
Good
spouses don't think we are.
clarification
Yeah.
there.
yeah, but can't wait to talk to Tracy about that one.
Okay.
I bought it secondhand off a teenage gamer.
In case you wondered, neither of us are audio specialists.